Hi, my name is Kurt Walling. I'm the Loss Prevention Director for Shasta-Trinity Schools Insurance Group. I'm your safety guide. My name is Kurt Walling. I'm the Loss Prevention Director for Shasta-Trinity Schools Insurance Group, and I am going to give you guys a class on conflict management. I have a master's degree, in counseling, and as a military veteran, one of the things that we had to deal with a lot is conflict management. Spent 26 years in the Army, in infantry, airborne, in ranger slots, as well as a combat engineer, and served all over the world, including in combat. And so conflict management is actually a much more important thing in my career than most might imagine. And in education, it's also extremely important to understand. We're going to talk about conflict, what it is, the definition of conflict. We'll talk a little bit, we'll give you a little explanation and some examples. And then we're going to talk a lot about stress, because without stress, you really don't have conflict. And stress is something we're all going through constantly. And especially now with COVID, it's had a big impact on the education community and teachers and administrators and everyone involved in education, including children. We'll talk about what stress is, how to identify stress, talk about how to deal with stress. And then we're going to talk a little bit at the end about depression, and we'll give you some suicide statistics to think about, because all of this stress and depression can sometimes end up in suicide. So the conflict definition, as a noun, it's a serious disagreement. It's not just like a conversation you have with somebody and you don't see eye to eye. It's a serious disagreement. It's an argument. It's typically a longer term, protracted disagreement or argument. You don't bump into somebody in the supermarket and have a conflict per se. You have maybe a disagreement or a little friction, but when we're talking about conflict, it's more of a long-term thing. As a verb, it's basically you're incompatible or you're at variance with someone else. You're clashing. There is friction between you and that other person or that other organization. As a noun, you could say these people have a conflict over salaries, but as a verb, you would say the teachers and the administration's interests would conflict, okay? So why do we care? Well, there's a lot of reasons we care about conflict management. The bottom line is stress. Stress touches everyone. There's good stress and bad stress, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But stress is a huge part of our medical issues in this country right now. Violence comes out of this stress, and obviously the conflict that arises. Productivity at work and at school suffers greatly when there's stress and violence involved. And then, of course, you have high turnover, you have higher workers' compensation claims. It affects the bottom line in a lot of different ways. And it just makes people not want to come to work anymore. I found it interesting when I was doing research that the most common cause of workplace deaths for women, and this is 2014, it's probably about the same, it's homicide, 19%. Frequently, that's from folks coming in from outside, such as a spouse, but it also happens amongst coworkers. And that's the same amount as roadway accidents. So that's pretty high if you think about it. And then slips, trips, and falls account for 16%. And if you're struck by an object or equipment, that's 4%. But homicide is right up there at the very top. Why? Stress, violence, conflict. So when we're talking about conflict, it's more than just, like I said, you having a heated argument with someone at the supermarket because they bump into the back of your legs with their shopping cart. Things happen all the time. We get upset with people all the time. But this is when one or both parties perceive a threat. Could be that the threat's not real, but what it's doing is it's activating fight or flight response. We'll talk more about that in a minute as well. Conflicts tend to get worse when you ignore them. They say, news doesn't get better with time, but really conflict certainly gets worse with time. Conflict is not going to go away just because you try and ignore it. These perceived threats to your well-being and survival are going to stay with you until you actually own up to it, face it, confront the person, talk it out, work out your differences. Everybody perceives threats differently based on life experiences, where you grew up, how much money you had, how supportive your parents were, your culture, what you believe in, you know, your values. These things impact everyone's perception of those threats, and then the stress level and the conflict. You can even have a physiological difference with someone else when it comes to that stress reaction. So what I'm saying here is your view of the stressor or the disagreement might be completely different than someone else who was faced with the exact same thing. It's based on your background. So these conflicts trigger extremely strong emotions. And you have to be able to manage your emotions. Some people are really good at managing their emotions. And that doesn't mean suppressing your emotions. It just means thinking and using some intuition in guiding your response to certain actions or things that someone would say to you. If you look at it from a positive perspective, conflicts are actually an opportunity for growth. Oftentimes when you get in a conflict with someone, you learn something about that person or the point of view that you didn't know before. You might be resistant, but when you learn these things and you actually accept the fact that they might be right, you're building trust. Basically what that does is it promotes your ability to survive challenges in disagreements and reduce the likelihood of conflict in the future, not just with that person, but with anyone else. So why do you get so upset during conflict? When someone says something, you just go off, you just lose your temper. It happens to everyone. I don't know, anyone who's a parent knows what I'm talking about. Some days the kids could be running all over the place and being crazy and you just laugh it off. And other days it just takes one word and you fly off the handle and you're upset. That's because there's a cascading issue of different stressors going on in your life at that time. And, at a certain point you just come to, you snap. It's just all comes down to stress and that stress reaction. So stress is the body's response to internal and external events. It's your body's form of surviving. And this goes back to way back in the very beginning. Animals have this same response. Your body basically drugs itself to stay alive. Now, back in the old days, it was when an animal would attack. And you could do two things. You could run really, really fast, or you could fight really hard. And that's why we call it the fright, fight, flight syndrome. It's called the general adaptation syndrome, actually. It can be triggered by a stressor or a threat to us. It can also be triggered by good or bad changes, which is interesting when you say, well, why would you have a stress reaction to a good change? The body doesn't know the difference. Anyone that's gotten married understands how stressful it can be. It literally does the exact same thing to the body as getting divorced does. Two traumatic things from a stress perspective, but one's really good and one's really bad. So your response is you're going to fight the stress or you're going to run away from it. Okay. Change, which we're all going through and have been for the last year with COVID restrictions and masking and the inability to do our jobs or relate to, our friends and family the way we would like to, it creates a really unsettling effect. And it's a slow, steady stressor. It's not a big stressor like getting in a car accident would be. It's a very long, it's drawn out, and it creates long-term effects. You also feel stress when you're challenged or threatened by an outside force, like, getting in a car accident or someone threatening you at work, or like, getting run over by a shopping cart in Winco. I mean, these kind of things, those are challenges. And then another really big stressor is when you have a loss of personal control. Most of as adults, we control our environment to a large extent. We can control our reaction to events and our emotions. But every once in a while, when you lose control or when you feel that things are beyond your control to deal with, then the stress just amplifies that, and then you have a big problem. There's a lot of symptoms of stress. Physical stress, you can look at someone quite often and you can see they're stressed. It's pretty obvious. We don't go around saying, oh, they're stressed because of this and they're, but you can see it. And here's a list of different things that you notice. Headaches. I know that when I get stressed out, I do get a headache. You get tired. And a lot of that has to do with sleep disturbances, which is further down the list. Some people get gastrointestinal problems, which, is really interesting. Like, why would someone have gastrointestinal problems as a result of being stressed out? Oh, there's a physiological component to this, which I'll tell you about here in a minute. Inability to focus, not being able to pay attention. Think about kids who you tell to do 15 or 20 times, hey, you got to do this, you got to do that. And they're just not listening. They're stressed out. They can't concentrate. They're literally not hearing you. Okay. Sexual problems, hypertension, high blood pressure. Your body's working harder than it should be because you're stressed out. And even things like sweating palms. If you ever remember this first time you went and you did public speaking, how your hands felt, how your body felt, it was shaky, your voice was shaky, your hands were sweaty. All these things are all a physiological response to stress. And then, of course, anxiety comes with that, and then heart problems. Now, if you look at this list and you start thinking about the high incidence of heart problems in this country, sleep disorders, anxiety, you can really draw a line right back to stress. Now, behavioral, these are the ones that are in your face. These are the ones you see, okay? Irritable, and more than normal irritability, but when, for instance, you have experienced that lack of sleep, and now you're grouchy, you're irritable, and someone could just say the littlest thing that would set you off. You see a list here, a whole bunch of increased this or disruptive patterns for overeating, undereating, compulsive shopping, basically anything that's out of the normal. So what you would call normal for yourself. So maybe your hobby is shopping, but now you're shopping all hours of the day. You can't get off of Amazon. Even when you're at work, you're buying all kinds of crazy stuff that you might not be able to afford. Overeating, undereating, sleeping too much, sleeping too little, basically anything that you're doing outside of normal routine would be considered a symptom of stress. Doesn't mean you're stressed. It just means that, if you're seeing this in somebody else or you're feeling this in yourself, you might be too stressed out. Harsh treatment of others goes to irritability, right? And who do we usually treat the most harshly? It's the people we love because they're easy targets. I know that in my own relationships, when I'm angry, I lash out, and when my significant other is upset and lashing out at me, I take a step back and think, wow, I wonder what kind of hard day she's had. It's really, really easy to take it personally. But if you can practice not taking this kind of stuff personally, you're going to be able to get to the root cause and then avoid that conflict. Let me go back one. So isolation is also a big red flag. Some people just withdraw. And if you have someone who withdraws from you, or you're the person who withdraws, that's actually a danger sign in more ways than one. So you want to watch those folks carefully and without angering them or pestering them, try and pull them back in and see if there's anything you could do to help them out, because isolation is not a healthy way of dealing with stress at all. Difficulty in communication as well. I mean, that's kind of isolation. You don't feel like communicating. You don't want to talk. You don't want to be around other people. So you're going to withdraw. Here's some facts about stress. And we do your workers' compensation insurance. We're your JPA, and we actually get things called stress claims. So someone will be too stressed out to work, and they will file a claim, workers' compensation claim, for stress. I had a teacher file a claim once because she said the kids were stressing her out. Like, I'm pretty sure that's her job, but she couldn't deal with it. She had it. It was done. She couldn't deal with it anymore, and she filed a stress claim, and got counseling and got better. So, like I said, everybody has their own tipping point. But workplace stress causes 1 million U.S. employees to miss work every day. 1 million people don't go to work because they're too stressed out. It's workplace stress, okay, which is a part of overall stress. But working is stressful in itself. And then, if you want to be at home doing something else and you have to go to work and then you have a boss you don't like, or there's a situation you can't control, or you don't feel appreciated, the stress just piles on and piles on and piles on. Work-related stress doubles people's risk of dying from heart disease. Your heart's working extra hard all the time. It's not good for you. Healthcare expenditures 50% higher for people who report high levels of stress. That's a lot. That's a lot of money. And then there's the other way to look at it. Well, I wouldn't be stressed out if I didn't have a medical condition in the first place, but it all goes hand in hand. And then students, they say that most students say that I failed because I was too stressed out. That's the most frequently reported impediment for academic success. I was the head of the military science department at Simpson University for 6 years, and I was an assistant professor there. And the students that dropped out of my program, invariably, if it wasn't money, it was stress. And not having enough money to pay for things is stressful in itself. And it all goes back to stress. It's crazy. So what about education? What about education-specific stressors? You guys are always asked to do more than you have time to do with fewer resources than you have to apply. That's just the way. The joke is, we've done so much for so long with so little, we're now qualified to do anything with nothing. Low pay. You don't get paid what you're worth. You don't get paid, in my opinion, educators do not get paid what they're worth. That's just the way it is. It's how our society works. If you look at teachers in Japan, educators in Japan, they're at the top of the social pecking order. They're respected as much more than doctors. They get high pay, and they have an excellent education system. It's interesting to look at that. It's just one metric, but it is very interesting to note. Dealing with parents, the kids aren't really the problem, are they? I mean, anyone who works in administration, and even teachers, the parents are the ones who really get stressed out dealing with. I'm not even going to go any further than to say that. You do get scrutiny from the public. They expect you to do a job because the public pays you. The public, pays you by paying taxes to do your job. So they expect very high standards from you. Lack of supplies. The budget's usually not where we need it to be. And I know a lot of teachers and other folks will go out and they'll buy their own stuff. They'll provide food and snacks for kids out of their pockets. It's just easier to do than trying to get it from the district or from the school. Then you get the lack of respect from the students, which is on a rise. It's really gotten to almost an epidemic level. I'm also a professional assault crisis instructor, and some of the teachers I hear telling me these stories, they're just almost unbelievable what these kids do in the classroom, and then the inability to hold the students accountable for their actions. It's really quite disturbing. And then, of course, you got your peers and coworkers. Most of us get along with each other fine. There's always that one person that people have issues with, but people come and go. So if you're having a real issue with a coworker, you probably should just go ahead and talk to that person and work your issues out. At some point or another, one or both of you will move on to a different place, and you can put that behind you. But all this stuff results in conflict. Okay, all these they just prime you for that conflict. So physiologically, I talked a little bit earlier saying that the stress is physiological, and conflict is actually a physiological response to outside stressor. Usually, when it comes to conflict, what it is, it's a prolonged sympathetic nervous system reaction. Your pupils dilate. Your salivation is inhibited, so you get cotton mouth. Like, remember, again, like the first time you did public speaking, it was hard to talk. You felt like you had sand in your mouth. Your lung bronchi relax, which makes it easier to breathe. And then your heart accelerates. This is the funny part about all this is we have heart problems, tachycardia, and other issues in this country because of stress. Well, it's because of this physiological response to the stressor. Digestive activity is inhibited. And why would that happen? Well, there's this whole issue is it's really it's a chemical response to the stress. Your body pumps something called ACTH into your system. ACTH is adrenocorticotropic hormone. And what it does is it releases cortisol and adrenaline into your body. And that's what's causing all this to happen. So your body is essentially drugging itself when it gets stressed out. And in the old days, it was so you could run really fast and fight really hard. That's why your heart accelerates. That's why your lung bronchi relax, so you can get more oxygen to your tissues. Your glucose released by the liver sends fuel to the cells. Epinephrine, norepinephrine are secreted by the kidneys. Your bladder relaxes, your rectum contracts. And so what's happening is your body is ramping up certain things that are going to allow you to run away really fast or fight really hard, and shutting other things down, other body systems that it doesn't need, like digestion. Okay. So that's why digestive activity is inhibited. That's why your bladder relaxes. That's why your rectum contracts. You think about an animal when it gets extremely frightened, like a bird before it flies away, it'll go to the bathroom. Or a cat or a dog, when they get terrified, they'll go to the bathroom before they run away or even before they fight. And if you've ever talked to someone who said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so scared I peed my pants," this is what's going on. It's the ACTH that's going through your system to drug you, to allow you to deal with that threat. Now, there's some ways to respond to stress in the workplace. We're not just going to run away, and we're not going to fight. Okay. Imagine if every time you got stressed out, you just socked somebody in the face. I don't think you'd have a job very long. And you wouldn't be able to run out the door every time you got in a conflict at work either. So the first thing you do is assess priorities. You start getting stressed out, you start getting angry with someone, try and figure out what is the priority here? What are we trying to accomplish? What's the mission? One of the things I like to do is practice facing these stressful moments before I get to work. Like if I know I'm going to have a stressful day, if I'm dealing with somebody at work that stresses me out, even if I'm on my way home and I know that I've got an issue with my significant other that I have to deal with, I rehearse it in my head. I go through a mental dialogue where I say, "Well, this is what I would say, and if this other person said this or that, this is how I would react," and counter, and back and forth and back and forth. And the idea here is to get yourself so used to dealing with these different responses and points that the other person is making, is that by the time you get there, you kind of have a script in your head already, and it'll allow you to stop and think, and put a little more time into your responses than just reacting off the cuff. You also have to have some realistic expectations. Not everyone's going to get promoted when they want to. You're going to have to do jobs you don't like sometimes. You're going to have to work with some people you don't like. And it's just about, having a little bit of, self-identity and figuring out exactly what's going on in your life and who you are at that time. But practice these realistic expectations so you're not disappointed. Incorporate healthy practices. There's a lot of things you can do in your life. Eating, getting enough sleep, even meditating. There's a lot of different things you can do to respond to stress so it doesn't result in a conflict. And then one of the things we have a problem with is change. One of the issues that we have with this whole COVID thing isn't the COVID or the fear of getting sick. It's actually the changes that we're having to deal with, doing things differently, not being able to be with our friends and family as much as we'd like. Here's some tips on managing stress. Organize yourself, number one. Now, this is a picture of an actual classroom that I went to, and the back of the classroom was a storage area. And yes, there were kids in the front of this classroom, and the teacher was frazzled and running around. The place was a mess. It just felt oppressive. You have to throw some of that stuff away. If you still have, as a teacher, if you're, a seventh grade teacher and you've been teaching for 14 years and you still have boxes of kindergarten stuff because that's how you started out, you probably don't need that anymore. You need to get rid of it. Declutter, get rid of stuff that you don't need, give it away to someone else. It'll actually make you feel good to give it away to somebody else, but clean your area up. Just doing that is going to make you feel a whole lot better. See how happy she looks? She's got a nice, clean, well-arranged workstation. So control your environment. Positive affirmations. We don't get told often enough how good we are, how much we're contributing. So sometimes you just have to sit back and think about what you're doing, how you're doing, and tell yourself that, you're pretty darn good. Look where you come from. Look at the education you attained. Look at how you're helping other people, but tell yourself you're good, because, if you're not getting it from someone else, you're going to have to do it for yourself. Make a list every day of all the things you've accomplished. There's a lot of different ways to do this. There's a lot of good programs online. You can go online, check those out. One of my favorite things is extracurricular activities. We don't have a whole lot of time to go out and do things. But when you do, make an effort, get off the couch, go somewhere and do something. I love this picture because the guys fly fishing, but in the background, there's a ski area. There's mountains to climb, there's hiking to do. I mean, this is a perfect ideal setting right here. Just looking at it makes me feel good. Get outside, do your thing. If your thing is gardening, go out and spend an hour in the garden after work, on nice days. If you have kids and you just want to be alone, you go home, the first hour, the first half an hour is mom's time or dad's time. Nobody talk to me. Go home and just do your thing. Okay. When I was a company commander in the 10th Mountain Division, I had a kayak on my truck and sat on that truck for, the whole summer. And my soldiers like, "Sir, why do you have a kayak on your truck?" And I'd say, "Well, because on the way home, I throw it in the river so I can forget about you guys." And it was really effective at reducing my stress level. Exercise. You're always going to say, "Well, yeah, I know exercise is important. I know diet's important, but it is extremely important for dealing with stress and conflict. Just feeling fit, working those bad chemicals out of your system, the ACTH and adrenaline, the cortisol. The best way to work that stuff out is just by walking. Walk outside, breathe some air, exercise. Go to the gym if you have to. But the bottom line is you have to be fit. You have to go outside and you actually have to move your body around. The human body is not meant to be a sedentary machine. We are designed to move. And so sitting around all the time leaves us at a huge disadvantage when it comes to inflammation. It lowers our immune system. It makes us all way more susceptible to stress. So you've got to move your body. Rest, on the other hand, is also extremely important. So you're going to have to find time to kick back, relax, put your feet up, and just mentally take a break. This is the time to tell the kids, "Hey, it's mom's time, it's dad's time," or take the extra long drive home, and just go sit next to the river or something. Bring a book, but you got to carve time out for yourself. You got to carve time out for yourself. And nutrition is extremely important as well. I just read an article today saying that exercise is never going to allow you to lose weight. Okay. It's true to a certain point. The big thing though is diet. So you've got to eat the right kind of foods. You've got to have the right kind of vitamins, nutrients, and the right ratios in your body, and combine that with exercise. Having the right types of food in your body is going to also reduce the likelihood that you're going to be experiencing medical issues with heart disease, inflammation issues, brain issues, because all this chemistry is affected by what you eat and also how you work out. Self-awareness. Self-awareness is also key. I talked about that a little bit earlier, but when you start feeling down or you start feeling stressed out or you start snapping at your coworkers, you need to take a step back and realize that about yourself. Do a mental inventory of what's going on. Why am I stressed out? What's really going on? What is the real issue here? And then deal with that issue instead of going down that conflict road with that coworker. And then humor is, I think, one of the best things. When you're really trying to manage stress, think about the show MASH. You guys remember MASH? Well, most of us are the age we grew up watching MASH, and those surgeons and those guys in those surgical hospitals in Korea, they were dealing with some of the most horrific injuries to young people, and day after day, and sewing these young kids up, watching them die, and they reacted by telling jokes, playing jokes on each other, and just getting this ridiculous shenanigans. And I loved it. It was a great show to watch, but I never really understood it as a kid. And then as I grew up and went through my military career, it all started to make more sense. And I mean, I saw so many ridiculous things when I was in the military. I just crack up laughing about all the stupid things that we did. And I realized that a lot of it was because we were just trying to relieve stress, and it worked really well. So when we're talking about conflict, we talk a lot about managing stress, but what about conflict? you got to do it quickly, because the longer you let the conflict go on, the worse it's going to get. You got to try and stay as calm as you can while you're managing this stress. So what you're going to do is you're going to be able to interpret what's going on. What's the other person saying? And we're looking at verbal and nonverbal communication. 60% of all communication is nonverbal. People could be telling you one thing, but they're thinking something completely different. When you're looking at them and seeing where their eyes are going and how they're gesturing, is their face getting red? Are they looking towards the door like they want to leave? Are they balling their fists up? Are they stepping towards you? These are all signs. You have to be able to interpret these nonverbal cues. If you see someone's eyes starting to tear up, you've gone too far. Okay, but you have to really, really pay attention to all of these verbal and nonverbal cues. You need to control your own emotions. That's extremely difficult when you're really stressed out yourself. There's a few things you can do to control your emotions and behavior. The first thing is breathing. Okay, breathing, you breathe in, you breathe out, you breathe in, you breathe out, just like normal. But what's happening is when you're breathing in and breathing out and you're stressed out, it's rapid and shallow. You're not getting oxygen to where it needs to go. Okay, so we used to call this 4 and 4s when I was in the military, and they teach this technique to professional football players and soldiers and first responders. But the idea to control your breathing is you breathe in for 4 seconds, and you breathe out for 4 seconds, and you actually count in your head while you're doing this. And you do that 4 times. And the idea is that steady rhythmic breathing gets more oxygen to you and allows you to take the time. The counting helps. It takes the time to relax and kind of assess what's going on. Okay. The next thing is grounding. Grounding is if you're standing there and you're having a verbal conflict with someone in the office. Sometimes you find yourself grabbing your belt, or you grab your hair or something, or you grab a pen, and this is all very normal. Some people who get up in front of others and they start talking, they'll click a pen. They'll have the pen, and you'll see this all the time. It's called grounding. The whole idea that what they're grounding is because now they're controlling something. It might just be a pen. They might just be controlling that pen, but they feel out of control in their environment. And so now, just by controlling that one little thing, then they can get some of that control back overall of their emotions and their actions. The last thing is positive self-talk. Positive self-talk is, when we talked about it previously, but positive self-talk is just saying, look, I'll be okay. This is going to be all right. I can get through this. I've got through this before. And it's more effective if you actually have something that you go back to, you fall back on every time. Some people have the one, and some of you probably are thinking, yeah, I know when I get really stressed out, I think of this, or I say, I'll be okay. My fiance says, I just repeat my social security number to myself when I get stressed out, which I thought was kind of weird, but she's a numbers person. And I started thinking about it. I was like, okay, well, it takes your mind off it. She says numbers, and she can take a minute, and then so like whatever you want to do, though, make sure you're doing that, because you got to control your behavior. If you can control your emotions, you can control your behavior. That'll allow you to communicate your needs. You're not going to threaten someone. You're not going to frighten someone. You're not going to punish them. You're going to just simply state, like, hey, I need you to hear my side. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm feeling. That's key and essential to avoiding the conflict. Make sure you're paying attention to the other person's feelings. You're probably both upset if you're having conflict, but the feelings are important, not just the words. So look in their eyes, talk to them, see what they're feeling. If they're angry, upset, confused, knowing what their emotions are first is the only way that you're going to be able to deal with the situation. And then, just be respectful of your differences. You're going to you might never agree. You might, agree to disagree. But the bottom line is there's a conflict, there's a disagreement, and throwing disrespectful words out there or accusations or swearing, God forbid, don't swear at somebody in a workplace during a conflict. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire. But just avoiding the disrespectful words is going to allow you to get through that much faster. Just hold your tongue. There's 3 different types of stress people. And when I'm telling you these, think about your own propensity for reacting under stress. There's the foot on the gas person. And this is the kind of person who's more prone to the fight response. So the ACTH gets in their system, and instead of wanting to run away, they just get all big and swell up and get louder. And that's the foot on the gas person. If you're that kind of person, you need to know that about yourself, because you're at a disadvantage. Unless someone's coming after you with a gun, or someone is trying to beat you up, being a foot on the gas person is really not going to be effective in the workplace. Foot on the brake, on the other hand, this is the kind of person that would be, kind of a runaway, shut down, stop communicating kind of person, and that's also not really that effective. Okay. When you look at these two, you got the flight, or you got the fight, and you got the flight. They're just not effective in the workplace. When you have someone who's overwhelmed with the emotions and stress, then you never know what they're going to do. They could do both. They could tense up. All right. They could freeze. But down below, you're so agitated that just one more thing, and you're going to explode. Okay. So what you need is something here in the middle. You need to get control of your emotions. You need to think about what's going on, prioritize your responses. And if you know that you are a foot on the gas kind of person, you need to deal with that issue before getting into a conflict. Listen for what's felt. This goes back to the emotions. You need to connect with the other person's needs. What are they trying to get through to you? What are their emotions? And just open your ears. You've got to listen. We all have a tendency to talk. We always want to make sure that they understand our side, because we're obviously right and they're wrong, or we wouldn't be having this conflict in the first place. But sometimes both people can be right. So you really need to feel why they're feeling the way they are. You need to figure out what's going on in their head and their heart, and then that'll help strengthen and inform you, and it makes it easier to communicate. The number one priority when you're in conflict with someone else should be resolution of the conflict. It really doesn't have a whole lot to do with who is right. Okay, because once it gets to the point where you're in conflict and you're upset, you're yelling, you're about to push that button on the send button on your nasty email, and you just have to stop. Okay, and remember that you're going to have to deal with this person later, and you're going to have to answer for any stress reaction, regardless of whether you're provoked or not in the workplace. Okay, you're going to have to think about the outcome and the consequences. It all goes back to making sure that the conflict is resolved. It has nothing to do with the actual issue at hand when it gets that contentious. And then focus on the present. A lot of folks will look back in the past and say, well, you always do this, you always do that. What I like to say is that we're not trying to fix blame, we're trying to fix a problem. Okay. And you can try that out with your significant other. You're like, hey, let's worry about fixing the problem, not fixing blame. See how well that goes over. But really, it's a good thing to think about, at least. When we start getting conflicts at work or at home, some of these things just aren't worth the time and effort we spend on them. It's just not worth it. Figure out whether or not it's worth your time. Discuss it with the other person. Tell them, look, I'm not withdrawing. I'm not refusing to talk, but there are more pressing issues. There's more, there's other stuff that we need to deal with. So I'm going to let you have this one and just move on. And then be willing to forgive. And honestly, this is one of the few things that men are better at in women when it comes to conflict resolution. Because, think about when we were kids. Little boys are getting a knockdown, drag out fight. And I've seen this in my kids. And then 2 hours later, they're best buddies. My daughter, on the other hand, she would get into a conflict with her friends. And weeks later, they're still upset with each other and they wouldn't forget. I'll tell you, that's the only thing men and women differ when it comes to these stress reactions. Women are almost invariably better at defusing situations in the first place. And know when to let something go. Just agree to disagree. And I have a joke, that I kind of a joking thing I say to my fiance. I'm like, you're right, I'm wrong. It's easier to say, it's fun, but it's become a joke. So when I'm done talking about stuff, I just say, you're right, I'm wrong. You can circle back later. You can always circle back later and say, look, I felt this way, when we were talking, and disengage and move on, and then make a mental note to go back and work on that later. We're talking about stress and conflict. A lot of this was going to result in depression, and depression is a killer. Depression is one of the main killers that results in all these physiological issues that we have in the United States. Disability, major depression is the leading cause of disability, not just in the U.S. but in the world, and it affects about 9.5% of adult Americans ages 18 and over. Young children actually are getting to the point now where there's a whole lot more depression amongst our young population. Almost 19 million people a year in the United States report having depression. So when you start talking about depression, we're looking at someone who's got a persistent, sad, or empty mood. It's a hopeless feeling. They perhaps start abusing substances. One of the big things is if you notice that you are no longer interested in your ordinary activities, like if you love to fish and all you've ever thought about is fishing, now just you don't care. You just want to sit, somewhere in a dark room. You don't care about doing anything, going anywhere. Or you see your spouse or your friends feeling that way. You might want to start talking to them. Any disturbances in eating or sleeping patterns, being irritable, more irritable than usual, you're crying for no apparent reason, anxious, you don't want to go out in groups, and then you just have an extremely hard time concentrating, making decisions. You're indecisive. You just don't want to participate. And then suicidal ideation, obviously, this is when it starts getting serious. Suicidal ideation can be an obvious sign of depression. And then physical symptoms, even like my heart hurts. I've got headaches all the time. I'm exhausted and I just want to sleep all the time. These are symptoms. Doesn't mean you're depressed. Doesn't mean someone that who has these is depressed, but they're symptoms, and it's something you should probably discuss with you or with your friends or spouse or whoever has it, or talk to a doctor if you see these symptoms in yourself. When we start talking about categories, who is more susceptible for suicide? We've got males, if you can see that tall blue bar there, are way, they have a way higher rate of suicide. And then white males, and in the age of 45 to 59, 30 to 44 is not far behind. So basically our working age adults, white male adults. What you don't really see here is attempts or suicidal ideation. And the misnomer with this graph is the fact that men are actually more successful at suicide. So when a men attempt suicide about 75 to 80% of the time, they're successful, where women will attempt suicide, they'll use pills or something else, and they do not actually commit suicide. It's just an attempt. So they're saved. It's an interesting metric. And I would say it's, men usually use guns. And so it's a lot harder to attempt suicide using a gun. Top 10 leading causes of death in the US. And this was 2019. So I put a note in here. I just researched this today. It's kind of shocking. COVID-19 is the third leading cause of death in 2020. Where influenza and pneumonia would be down at number 9, you just say, well, we have COVID-19 and it's bumped everything down a couple of steps. Heart disease, cancer, unintentional injuries, those are all common sense. Yeah, we're going to have a lot of heart disease, which is from stress. Chronic lower respiratory disease, strokes, Alzheimer's becoming much more prevalent, especially among our older population, obviously. Kidney disease. Suicide is number 10. It is number 2 amongst our younger population. the only thing that's a more common cause of death in our younger population is unintentional injuries. There's 100 to 200 attempts for every completed suicide, and we call those sometimes a cry for help. So if you see somebody who's a friend or family member or a coworker has attempted suicide, you need to pay attention to that. It's hopefully just a cry for help. And, it takes a lot of attempts for a suicide. So when you think about that as, the number 10 leading cause of death, think about how many attempts there are. Depression affects 20 to 25% of Americans that are over 18 years old in a given year. And the one scary thing here is every 12 minutes, there's a death by suicide in the US, every 12 minutes. That's a great deal. That is a lot of people. And it's something we can control, and it has a lot to do with stress, it has a lot to do with conflict management. So if you see someone who's exhibiting one or more of these signs, probably talk to them. If they're talking about suicide, doesn't mean they're going to do it. But what we don't want to do is get scared and not talk to them because you're afraid that, if I talk to them about suicide, they're going to do it. If they're making statements about being helpless or worthless or, I'm no good, I'll never be any good, or I'll never be successful, those kind of things, catastrophizing, talk to them. They have a preoccupation with death. The kid that wears all black, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have a preoccupation with death and they're going to commit suicide. But, when you start looking at their phone or you start looking at their screensaver and it's all death and if there's a preoccupation there, you need to talk to them. When someone's suddenly happier or calmer, they've been morose and upset and disappointed and hopeless, and now all of a sudden they're happier. Most of us know that that's because now they've made that choice to actually commit suicide. They start giving things away, their prized possessions, setting their affairs in order, going and visiting grandma one last time kind of thing. Pay attention to those things. That means if they've got a plan, then you're going to have to intervene and you're going to have to give them help immediately. So one of the things we did in the military is when we saw a soldier with signs like this, we had this thing called an ACE card, ACE, like a card, a playing card. And the ACE stood for ask, care, and escort. The first thing you always do when you hear someone talking about suicide or they start exhibiting these symptoms, you have to ask them clearly and concisely, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Look them in the eye, non-judgmentally, and just say, hey, are you thinking about hurting yourself? You're trying to show them positive regard and empathy, but you got to get them to tell you, yes, I am thinking about hurting myself. Because then you have a responsibility to care for them. Positive regard, support, non-judgmental. All you want to do at that point is help them get through the situation. Now, if it's serious and they have a plan, which means, when you ask them, how would you do it? If they say, well, I don't know, I'd probably jump off a bridge somewhere or something. It doesn't sound like a real concrete plan. But if they say, yeah, I have a bullet in my nightstand and I carved my name on it and I've got my 45 that's in the closet, they have a very, very specific plan. That's part of ask. You need to find out if they have a plan. You got to care for them. If they do have that detail of a plan, you need to escort them. That's the E. So escort them to a medical facility or to someone who's qualified. Get them on the suicide hotline and don't leave them. Don't leave them alone. Stay with them or find someone else who's qualified to stay with them. It's all very important. ACE, ask, care, and escort. So we talk a lot about conflict. We talk mostly about stress today, but that's a huge part. It's just locked with conflict. We talked about depression. We talked about some suicide statistics. And if any of you do have any issues or you're having any conflicts, you gotta reach out to somebody if it can't be resolved. There's a lot of different ways to get through conflict right now, and it's a stressful time for everybody. 75% of all educators have reported more stress than usual in the last year. And there's been like a 20% increase in stress-related hospitalizations and other physical issues. So take care of yourselves. I think we're coming to the end of this. I've had both my vaccines. I'm feeling good. I've been to a few schools. I'm talking to people more. I'm getting out more, and it's a load off. It's really nice. So I encourage you guys to take care of yourselves and just get out there and do what you can.